One of the great things about Moto is that it allows the user to customize the interface. In this video, we're going to focus our attention on customizing the main viewport and go over some important settings that will help you work inside of Moto. So as you can see here, I've just loaded in a couple presets for our mesh library. I have an executive phone, and I've entered in one of the tables. And we're going to focus on changing all the settings in our viewport. And I want to show you some important ones that are going to help you, especially when you're in the modeling world. So let's jump over to my phone here. And you can see that this is a pretty dark object. It's kind of dark, so it's kind of hard to see this dark shaded object on our background. So there's a number of ways that we can shade our scene to help us out. If we focus our attention to the top left-hand corner of the viewport, you're going to see two different buttons. Let's look at this button on the right, because the one on the right is going to allow us to shade our scene or to preview different shading types right here in the viewport. Now, when you turn it on, it might be on shaded, so yours might be on different. When I opened up my application, mine automatically went to shaded. So let's explore some of these other ones. If you just click on this button, you're going to see a number of options that are going to appear. Let's change over from shaded to wireframe. Hey, look at that. So in wireframe, we're going to see the outlines of all of our polygons, unlike shaded, which is going to fill in the polygons and give it a more of a solid look. Let's change it again. Let's click on the button. Let's go to solid. So the solid setting, again, is going to start to fill in all the polygons. But this time, the color of the polygons, and more specifically, the color of the wireframes, is much lighter. Let's check out some other ones. Vertex map. If we had a vertex map deformer applied to this object, we'd see those show up in red. We don't at the moment, so it's just showing up as its default green. Here's the shaded. Now, the shaded one's going to start to inherit some of the properties of our materials, more specifically, the color of the polygons. You can see some green ones up here and some black ones down here. If we change this over to texture, now we're going to start to see the individual bitmap textures applied to our object. Now, this phone's got some buttons, some keys, some things up here that are being applied as a texture map. So that's an important distinction that many people often get stumbled upon, the difference between shaded and texture. If we have any texture maps applied to our scene, this includes bumps, reflection maps, in order to view them, we need to be on texture. Now, if we went to shaded texture, now we're going to start to see something a little bit different on our phone. We're going to start to see the materials, the color of our materials is going to start to go away, but the textures remain, which is kind of cool. And last but not least, let's look at Advanced OpenGL. Now, Advanced OpenGL is not only going to give us a preview of the colors and the material properties for all of these polygons. It's going to show us the textures, and it's going to start to show us a little bit of the lights too. We have a light applied in this scene, a directional light, and now we're starting to see the shadows from the light, which is kind of cool. So the Advanced OpenGL setting here is going to give you a more comprehensive look at your scene. There's a couple other ones that are kind of fun. There's this ghost tone, which is going to kind of give this kind of unique green and blue cast on everything. I've met some people that love modeling in this mode. There's also cell shaded, which is going to give us kind of a more blocky appearance to all of our shadows and our reflections. Again, kind of a cool look. And then last but not least, reflection. And reflection applies a default reflection map and it shows our object as if they're 100% chrome. And this is really good for surfaces like cars and things that have real compound curves. So reflection is often useful when modeling very curvy objects. So at the top of this list, this is where we get to change all of our viewport shading options, and there's a number of them. I find that I usually hang out in either shaded, texture, or Advanced OpenGL. For the most part, when I'm modeling and setting up our scene, I usually hang out in the shaded mode, which is going to be pretty quick. It's not as processor intensive as texture or Advanced OpenGL. One thing of note about the Advanced OpenGL setting here, if you have a slower graphics card, or maybe you don't have a computer that's super high end, this is really going to bog down your machine. So only turn it on when you really absolutely have to. I think you're going to find that shaded and texture is where you're going to hang out. There are times, however, when wireframe is really useful when we're modeling very complex objects or we need a very high degree of accuracy. So this is how we change all of our shading options right up in here. Now, there's some more options down here that we're going to get to a little bit later on, so feel free to explore these at the moment. The great thing about all of this is that you can't screw it up. You can always go back to an original setting, so don't worry about exploring and experimenting with all of these options in here. I think you're going to find that there's a number of them that will help you out, especially when you're modeling. Okay, let's change this back over to shaded. There we go. And now I want to start talking about our background. If I zoom out a little bit here, you can start to see my entire table. Here's our Cartesian grid on the ground. You can see this light gray grid is our work plane. But in the very, very background of our scene, you're going to see that the colors transition from this kind of dark gray down here. We have a little bit of a transition area. And then it goes to this lighter gray. We have that nice kind of gradient in the background. Now, I love this gradient. It gives you a sense of the horizon line. That way, if you're super in close, or maybe you've kind of rotated your viewport to, kind of a weird angle, you always know which way's up and which way's down. The dark gray on the bottom is always going to be pointing down, and the light is always going to be pointing up. But sometimes that can get real annoying, or maybe it's the colors of your gradient is going to start to interfere with the modeling process. Here we have a dark colored object, and this dark colored object on top of this kind of dark gray background, we're starting to lose some information there. It's a little bit difficult to see. So I'm going to change my viewport settings. Now to do this, we need to place our cursor inside the viewport, inside of this empty space in here. If we place our cursor inside the viewport and hit the O key on our keyboard, there it is, we're going to get this popover. Now this popover is full of a lot of options that we can change, but I want to bring your attention to this part right here, almost in the middle, where it says GL background. It's going to default. If you're in the Moto 401 layout, the default is set to gradient. Now, this is pretty cool. I love having the gradient, but we also have some other options in here. I want to talk about two of them. And if we change it to none, watch what happens to the background. That gradient goes away, and now we just kind of have that solid blue in the background. Now, this is really handy, especially when you have dark objects in your scene. Just changing it to none, we'll get this light kind of nice blue in the background. It's also going to help you on your performance too. If you have an older machine that doesn't have a very fast processor, or maybe you don't have a beefy graphics card, changing the OpenGL background to none is going to increase your performance a little bit. Let's go back to our viewport settings, hit the O key again. Before we go too much further, it's important to note that that little popover is going to be drawn wherever your mouse cursor is. So here's my mouse cursor here in the center, and if I hit O, you can see it pops over there. If I go up here to the top left and hit O, it's going to pop over there. So just keep in mind, wherever your cursor is, that's where the popover is going to come on screen. Okay, so here we are in GL background again. We set it to none. Let's look at another one. Let's set this to environment. When it's on environment, it's going to look in your shader tree, and it's going to load whatever environment that you have created in your shader tree into the background, which is very cool. This is really neat, especially if you have an environment map, like an HDR environment map, loaded in your shader tree. You can see that right here in the modeling viewport, which is kind of cool. Keep in mind, if you are using a bitmap texture in your environment, it is going to slow down your machine some, but sometimes it's nice to be able to see what your model is going to look like in your environment before you hit render. Now let's go back to our viewport settings again, because I want to change my GL background once more. There's one more option in here, and that's image, where we could load in an image that we could place in our background. So we have some other options as well. Okay. I want to talk about another item in your viewport that's important to know about when you're setting up your viewports. Let's look at these inactive meshes right here. I want to move my cursor away from that viewport because I want to show you a couple things in my scene. If we cruise over here to my item list, you can see that my scene is constructed with a couple different items. We have my phone executive, this guy up here at the top, but we also have this table that my phone's sitting on. Every time I activate and bring this item to the foreground, the other item goes into the background. Whatever item we have selected, that is the foreground item that we can edit. Any other item is considered in the background. So right now I have my phone executive 1 selected, but the table, this table item, is considered inactive or in the background. Now, if we look and examine our scene, you can see that my phone is shaded. but my table is set to wireframe. And this setting is being derived through our viewport settings. So let's hit O again to bring up our viewport settings. And here we are under inactive meshes. And you can notice that it's set to wireframe. So at this setting, background items will be set to wireframe. If we change it to flat shaded, watch what happens to my table. My phone stays the same shading level, but my background item, or my table over here, is now being shaded under the flat shading algorithm. So back to our viewport settings one more time by hitting the O key. And let's change the inactive meshes from flat shaded to same as active item. And now you can see that the table, even though it's still in the background, is getting shaded correctly. We're starting to see all its wireframe, and it's starting to look pretty cool. Okay, so I'll leave you to determine how you want to work. I normally work in wireframe. That way I have a clear understanding of which mesh item I'm currently working on and which set of polygons I have to work with. Okay, let's go back to my viewport settings one more time because I forgot to change my GL background from environment to none. There we go. Okay, that's looking a lot better. I like the way this looks. Okay, now it's a little bit easier to see now. Let's go back to our viewport settings one more time because there's one more thing I want to show you. If we cruise all the way down to the bottom of this little menu, there's this section called mouse control. Now, I bring your attention to this mouse control because I want to make sure you guys are aware of this trackball rotation. When you first start Moto, the trackball rotation is going to be set to yes. Now, this is kind of a cool navigation setting that's going to influence how we operate our scene. With the trackball rotation set to yes, how we rotate our scene and how our scene rotates around our mouse is going to be more similar to those old school trackballs that you used to see instead of mice. So a lot of people they prefer to have the trackball rotation set to no. So make sure you set that to no if you find that the trackball rotation is a little uncomfortable. I prefer working without the trackball rotation on. The navigation and the rotation of our scene is a little bit more natural for me and for the way I work with the trackball navigation set to no. So experiment with it, try it out, see which way you like. I think you're going to find one way or another is going to work really well. So back to our viewport settings. Now, if you've probably already noticed that there's two tabs over here on the right. We've been focusing up until now on the drawing and control tab, but there's another tab called visibility. Let's click on the visibility. Inside the visibility tab, this is where we can toggle certain elements in our viewport on and off. Most importantly, we can turn lights on, our cameras we can show on and off. We can show vertices or hide vertices if we want. For us, let's turn off our grid just so you can see what happens when we turn off one element. So let's turn off our grid, and then as we move our mouse away from our viewport settings, you can see that the grid is now gone. Let's turn it back on. Back to our viewport settings by hitting O, and there it is, show grid, and our grid's returned. So experiment around with a lot of these. Don't worry, you can't mess them up. They're just on-offs. So experiment around, see which ones you like to have on and which ones you like to have off. Now, I've only talked about a few of our viewport settings in this little video. There are a ton more to go over. So I want to let you explore and kind of discover what all of these viewport settings do. But I think once you understand the importance of this window, it's going to help the entire process of working inside of Moto a lot easier.